I'm Suzanne Bertin with Collaborative Utility Solutions, and today is our bi-monthly webinar, and today's topic is Consumer Protections and the Common Information Model. We have with us a guest speaker, Scott Coe, but first let's run through some background information on our 2222 project. So this is a project that CUS has in collaboration with PNNL, sponsored by the DOE Office of Electricity. So as always, the opinions that are expressed in this presentation are strictly opinions of CUS's and not necessarily of DOE or PNNL. So as part of this project, we have been issuing bi-monthly reports and doing these bi-monthly webinars. This month, as I said, we're doing customer protection and the common information model. We have also a FERC2222.org website where we are tracking policy developments in the states related to FERC Order 2222 implementation and DER policy more broadly than that. We are also working on white papers on a variety of DER topics. We have discussion groups that allow for commissions and commission staff to have secure discussions among themselves regarding issues of interest related to FERC 2222 implementation. And finally, we have a resource library that's a curated collection of materials that are, that are relevant to DER implementation. So we're working on bi-monthly reports that include current news and developments in the DER world. Then we dive into a specific issue in much greater detail. And then we try to include some kind of tip or instruction on how to use the 2222 tracker, which again is at the FERC.org website. So our reports will all be posted to that website, so you can take a look at those later on. We have the chat rooms live. This is, again, where commissioners and commission staff can have a secure opportunity to chat about issues that are of interest. And if you have any issues with those, just reach out and we will make sure that you get connected. All right, so with that, let me just jump in and give a few updates as far as what has occurred in the 2222 implementation world in recent months. We've had a few FERC actions related to compliance filings from MISO and PJM. FERC approved MISO's third compliance filing to FERC regarding the removal of a 10 megawatt minimum threshold in the review of physical withholding by market monitors, and in addition of a requirement that EDCs must inform DER aggregators when DER operation is overridden by the EDC. MISO had also submitted filing in May relating to outstanding directives in FERC's order on MISO's second compliance filing. And this reflected FERC's acceptance of the June 1st, 2029 implementation date and removed an earlier implementation date option proposed by MISO to use the DRR Type 1 participation model. Now, in July, FERC rejected the motion for rehearing that had been submitted by Voltus, where they had been arguing that the approval of the DRR Type 1 implementation date and the approval of the June 1st, 2029 compliance date was unjust and unreasonable. In July, FERC approved PJM's fourth compliance filing to FERC, moving its order 2222 implementation date to February 1st, 2028. And then in the states, there was also some activity. In late May, the Indiana URC hosted a stakeholder meeting regarding rules needed for registrations and study process of DER aggregations participating in wholesale markets via distribution utilities. And they also took some stakeholder comments following that meeting. Additionally, the DC Department of Energy and Environment issued an RFI regarding DER aggregations and FERC Order 2222 implementation in DC. So that one, the purpose of that was to gather information about market interest, potential next steps that district agencies, utilities, and industry groups could consider taking to help advance VPPs and DER aggregations in DC. Maryland, of course, continues to be very active. They issued an order approving the commission staff's proposed license to operate, and those rules are that application is now in effect. In addition, in June, the Maryland PSC approved the B2G regulations as part of its DRIVE Act implementation. The new rules were effective in July. Utilities have also filed their plans, and there's going to be a hearing next week on September 3rd regarding those plans. Meanwhile, in New York, in the Grid of the Future proceeding, stakeholder comments were due in July. And then in the Commonwealth of Virginia, stakeholder comments were due on proposed rules relating to interconnecting small generators and storage. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to David Kathan, who is going to talk about consumer protections.
Thanks, Suzanne. Yeah, this is David Kathan, and I'm going to walk through a number of slides on the important consumer protections related to Order 2222 and DER implementation more broadly. Fundamentally, consumer protections will be core to the implementation of Order 2222 and DER integration into the grid. And fundamentally, consumer protections need to be incorporated into the implementation. FERC itself in the Order 2222 explicitly directs actions designed to promote consumer protections, and I'll walk through a few of those in the next slide. State and local regulators need to take action in their own jurisdictions to ensure that consumers are protected. And then finally, if you've listened to previous webinars and seen our reports, we are a big supporter of the use of a DER registry, and we also strongly believe that consumer protections need to be embedded directly into a registry. It should not just be just a database of DERs. So embedded in actual requirements that FERC issued in Order 2222 back in 2000, FERC incorporated several important provisions designed to protect consumers. The first is on double compensation or double counting. This was a major focus of the order, and FERC in the final order sets requirements to remove the potential for double counting of resources or compensating resources for providing same service twice. This makes sure there is no necessarily gaming or potential for double participation, which can create some potential problems for consumers. And then another key aspect has to do with market participation agreements. In order to participate as an aggregation, a DER aggregation needs to execute a market participation agreement with an RTO and ISO. All generally, market participants in any of these RTOs need to sign similar market participation agreements, and FERC required the similar for aggregators. These are in order to ensure that consumers are protected and that they are a test that they'll follow the tariffs and rules and regulations, both at FERC and at state levels. And finally, coordination requirements are key in 2222, and they are designed to ensure that DER owners and consumers are not subject to discrimination and abuse. And at this point, all the RTOs and ISOs have complied with these requirements. Now, turning to the states, in implementation of Order 2222, we've identified 5 areas where there need to be some actions taken. The first is in licensing. A aggregator who will be participating at the state level should states should consider licensing of these aggregators to ensure that they are protecting consumers by, following current codes of conduct, state rules, and state tariffs, and with a legal attestation. This is, we think, is a core responsibility and importance. Information sharing will be very important. The sharing information about DER assets, both so who's the owners, consumer usage, and tariff participation, will be critical to the implementation of FERC Order 2222. But even though we are recommending information sharing, any information sharing needs to protect consumer privacy, ensure that there's cybersecurity, and to also protect the critical information from being released to people who don't have the responsibility to be able to see it. Electric distribution company DER review is a core part of FERC 2222. And in order for a DER to participate in a aggregation, FERC required in 2222 that EDCs, electric distribution companies, should be able to review and to assess on whether a DER is capable to participate, and also to see whether it potentially could create local reliability or safety issues. State and local regulators need to consider rules and look at oversight on how the review is conducted, especially since the electric distribution company is under their regulation. Then, similar to the responsibilities under FERC 2222, there's also a need at the state level and local level to look at dual participation and to ensure that there is not necessarily dual participation. But on the other hand, especially at the state level, there needs to be a consideration that there are additional value streams that a DER can provide. So a careful examination of what are the various services and whether they are being provided at the same time, and whether they're being double compensated should be looked at in great detail. And finally, consumer selection and switching rules. There should be specific rules in order to prevent fraud and abuse about signing up DERs that when the customer has not approved that, and also to allow for switching between aggregators. So these 5 things we think are core to what states should be looking at. As I indicated,
actually, Dave, a question for you. Are there any states that you're aware of that have done a decent job at one or more of these things that folks can look at?
Thanks for that question. At this point, the DER aggregator licensing, that is the one where I think, especially Maryland, has taken a lead on in terms of licensing. As far as the other items, no, there's not as much. There is some discussion about information sharing, but I don't believe there's, these have gotten into a detail yet. So as far as the we believe that consumer protections should be embedded into the DER registry. There needs to be, in order to make sure that everybody has the right information, approval procedures need to be built into the registry to allow customers to be able to select their aggregator, to sign and agree to data privacy and security rules, and to also allow customer switching to a different aggregator. That needs to be incorporated such that this is reasonably seamless, and for both the customer and for an aggregator to be able to access and be able to work with both the customers, the DER owners, and with the EDC. And then the information should be provided to customers in the registry to show them their current aggregator selection, to show them that the retail programs or market participants, market products they are currently enrolled in, with links and details on the consumer programs they desire more information. And also explain when they can switch. Many times there's a requirement that it can only switch at the end of a month. So that needs to be made very clear to the customer. So overall, the process should not allow a DER site to be included in aggregation while proper documentation from the customer to validate this participation. But there's also a need for sharing of information in a way that protects privacy, but also allows easy access for both the customer and for the aggregator. So now that's the end of my slides. I'm going to turn it over to Scott, who will now talk about the common information model. Take it away, Chris. Scott.
Thanks, Dave. So just before I begin, if you have questions as we're going through, probably someone else has a similar question, so please feel free to ask anything that comes into your mind as we go through this. I'm going to talk a little bit about the CIM, assuming basically that people may have heard of the CIM but don't know very much about it. And I'm not going to get too far into the details technically, but talk a little bit about why it's important to think about a common model for data as we get into this FERC 2222 world. So just a tiny bit of background. CIM was developed by the electricity industry for use by the electricity industry. It actually came out of EPRI in the late 90s. It covers data that can be used anywhere from the largest investor-owned utility down to the smallest cooperative. It contains representations across the whole value chain. We model generation, transmission, distribution, metering and meter data, customer data, and we even have DERs in our model at this stage. So what is the CIM exactly? So the CIM is a UML, Unified Modeling Language, representation of data objects. There are well over 2,000 data objects in the model, and each object represents something that you generally can think about. Sometimes you can even go and touch. It's a real thing. Sometimes it could be an invoice. It could be a piece of equipment. Here I'm showing an outage, and each one of these objects has a number of attributes that describe it. So here the outage has a period and an estimated period if it doesn't have an actual period. And it also has relationships to other objects. And this is the real key piece, because in this particular case, the outage may be related to an incident. So the incident may have, there might be multiple incidents related to an outage. There's often multiple pieces of equipment associated to an outage, and you may have different crews associated to an outage. So these associations are really important, because as you start to document the data, you can also follow the associations and find out what other data is in your data repository related to the data that you might be interested in. The second real concept that is important to understand is that we have this idea called specialization. So many of the objects in our model are specialized. So we go from the most general thing down to a very specific thing. And the arrow kind of maybe looks like it points the wrong way, but this is the way the UML language is set up. So you can see at the top, one of the core elements of the CIM is this thing called equipment. So when was the equipment put in service, and is it normally in service? In other words, it can be two of these flags. So that could be a transformer, that could be a pole, it can be anything. We specialize that into multiple different types of equipment. Here I'm showing the one that I'm most interested in, conducting equipment. And you can see here, when you specialize into conducting equipment, you also get a new association. And then we can even go further. A piece of conducting equipment might be a switch. A specialization of a switch might be a protected switch, and a breaker is a specialization of a protected switch. So as you get more specialized, you add more data elements, and you may add more associations. So it's a very robust and highly connected model. And that allows us to do data exchanges where we just send over little pieces of information, even sometimes references to data, And the data that you have at rest in your utility systems referenced by that data, and all of the data that's associated to it can be found. So it's a very robust and deep model. Okay, so that's just a little bit of how we describe the CIM. Now I'm going to talk a little bit about the sort of scope of the CIM. The CIM started as a way to describe the actual power system. So one might argue the core strength of the CIM is that you can take any power system that's out there and describe how all the equipment is connected. You can describe every feeder, you can describe all the equipment inside of a substation, and more importantly, you can take that representation and feed it into a number of different software tools that can do analysis. So it's a software platform independent way of explaining my grid, and you can then use it to do analysis in different tools. So we call that part of the model. Roughly a third of the elements in the model are highly correlated with this part of the model. We call this the grid model. This has all the equipment, the connectivity. This is where measurements are stored. So if you're actually collecting voltage and current and power numbers from the field, this is where you store that data, and also has the ability to do dynamics simulations. All right, so that's the first package. The second package is what I call more transactional data. This is what we call the enterprise package. The enterprise package is meant to cover all of the utility operations that we all know and love, like metering and asset management, outage management, operations like switching and work management in the control room. So anytime you have one of these kinds of activities, I showed the outage object earlier. That's part of this particular package. This allows you to exchange information like outages, like meter data, like switching orders between different systems. So for example, if you've got an outage management system and you want to send those outages to a database, maybe a customer database, and correlate it, then you can send data among all those different systems. So this was really developed to help utilities break down the silos within their companies so that the different departments could exchange data and correlate data and not keep their own data and not share it with the other groups within the utility. The final package, as it's called, is called the markets package. This is the latest one. As you can see, the number is higher in the IEC standards list. This was created as markets were emerging in the late 1990s and early 2000s. This supports all of the markets we have for wholesale, like LMP calculations, ancillary services. It's of course been extended to cover flexibility services at distribution and virtual grid resources. So I like to think of this more as the virtualization package than the markets package, because you could use these concepts even in a vertical utility that needs to determine if it should call a demand response event or turn on one of its own generators. So anything where you're doing dispatch decisions based on lowest cost, whether that's an open market design, as many of us would prefer, or in a closed market design. The markets package allows you to model the data like dispatch events, and then if there's compensation that's outside of the utility for those operations, how to track performance and actually pay or collect revenue from folks. So I'm going to go through now some of the reasons that over my several decades of working with the CIM, I've heard most commonly from utilities when I make a presentation about transitioning from their application-based models to a central model for their utility. The first one is that standards are slow and rigid. So absolutely, I've been working on a standard for DER communications. I started it in 2016. The first formal publication actually came out last fall, so that was like a decade of work. So yes, it takes a long time to get consensus. It takes a long time to go through the documentation process and a long time to get international approval. But that's only half of the story. The CIM is a model, as I mentioned earlier, that anyone can download. It's open source. So you can use all of the data objects that are there, even if there aren't official IEC profiles for the particular data exchange you're interested in. So you can use it more as a library of data and data exchange formats without actually being compliant with the standard. Obviously, if there is a standard in place, and there's some very well-established ones for meter data exchange and outage data management, things like that, you can go ahead and use those standards. But if there aren't standards, there's nothing stopping you from building your own little exchange. And while it might not be an international standard that every vendor might support, it would be understandable by any vendor. And a lot of vendors are now building tools that are very flexible. They can take a CIM object with any sort of element, and as long as it knows the data from the CIM, it can figure out what to do with that data and where to put it. So standards in those three packages, the grid package are in 61970, the enterprise package standards are 61968, and the markets package are 62325. There's a 3 there, should not be a 2. That was a typo. So you may see those numbers flying by in documents here and there. If you see them, that represents in specialized exchanges in one of those main domains, the grid domain, the enterprise domain, or the markets domain. All right. So the second problem is I can't use the CIM because my grid is special. There are obviously different ways to construct grids, radial, looped, networked, etc. But there's really nothing that unique that you can't describe your grid with the CIM. Because we have all of the individual elements designed as standalone pieces, each breaker is by itself, each switch is by itself, each bus bar is by itself, and each transformer actually is made up of multiple objects. So you can create any sort of power transformer that's unique. You can stitch together pretty much any grid. And because there are so many utilities now using this, there really is no gap. And if there is a gap, you can create a new element and add that to the library. But that doesn't happen very often. So because of its sort of Lego building abilities, you can use the CIM to model your grid, even if you think your grid is so different from every other grid on the planet. And then finally, the big one is I don't want to pay for this. It's very costly. Oftentimes software solutions come with their own database and you don't have to worry about it. You can just accept the vendor's model. If you happen to be aligned with one of the big vendors out there, you may have been using that vendor for decades, and it sort of makes sense just to align yourself with those data models. But you're really limiting yourself here, and there is a cost to making that change. It is loaded at the front end, so you do spend more up front, but there is a improved rate of return. So as you get more and more of your interfaces built in CIM over time, you see more of the interoperability. And you can talk to utilities that have implemented CIM. The most common one in the US is probably ERCOT, and they will tell you that not only is it easier to make changes now that they've done their grid modeling in CIM, but they've reduced the number of errors in their model substantially. So you have to look at both explicit cost and then the implicit cost of all of your staff who are tracking down data errors. It's very common for ratings to be in multiple places in a utility, different databases and different people's desktop spreadsheets. If you start to align your data into a common repository, then you can really start to get a single source of truth that can alleviate a lot of problems. Okay, so that was a little bit on why you might, what the CIM is and why you might think about it. And there are many different stakeholders who would currently like to know more about distribution grids today. And this is where we're getting into now sharing some of this data externally. So Europe, most of the utilities have already adopted CIM, or at least on their way to adopting CIM internally. In the US here, we haven't done that internally. So we have really two steps. First is to get everyone aligned on CIM who hasn't started down that path. And then second is sharing this data outside. So you can think about a bulk power system operator, one of the ISO RTOs, primarily here, starting to look at what's going on in the distribution grids below them, thinking about long-term planning, thinking about shorter-term congestion management, to-date and frequent changes to what's going on with the distribution system. Where are there outages? Where are there upgrades being done? Having that in a standard way that a bulk power system operator could then grab multiple models in all the same format and stitch them together to get a wide area view would be very, very useful. As we talk about the FERC Order 222 stuff here, the correlation of services and the whole double counting thing we were talking about earlier is important, because if we can know where there's DERs on the distribution system and correlate those at the wholesale market for aggregations, all talking about the data in the same way, it allows us to do much more of this accounting and tracking and checking kind of things that David was talking about. And finally, there's a number of external stakeholders who are interested in looking at what's going on, not least of which are developers who'd like to be able to do more pointed studies locally to see where they might want to target investment in the grids. So this is the case, I think, for publishing this data more externally from where we've been in the past. So we could have done this with the bulk power system 20 years ago, but we didn't. I will say that Europe has done this. Every hour, the European transmission operators publish a CIM for the last hour that includes all of their outages as well as load flows. And they publish that to their reliability coordinators, who stitch them together and create a wide area view of the transmission system. We could do that here in the US. We haven't done it. The reason, I think, is probably because there's only 7 wholesale market operators in the US. There's only a couple hundred transmission owners, and maybe there's very large ones. There are thousands of generation facilities, but the larger ones is even a smaller number. So the number of players here is fairly small. So if you're in one region, you're probably okay with using the modeling that's being done in that region. I have some animation here, so I'm going to have you click as we go through this. But as we look at the distribution system, now we're looking at not 7 operators, but 3,000 operators. We're looking at hundreds of millions of, well, at least 100 million electricity customers. So now, not standardizing a model when you have potentially this many different entities really presents a problem, specifically for those who are selling products that might interact on the customer side at one of those 160 million sites to one of those 3,000 utilities. Click. As we think about rooftop solar, about 5 million, electric vehicles, 5 million. So like if we actually thought about expanding that, maybe we have 500 million devices that might be out there, thinking maybe there's 3 devices at each customer site. So we're talking about a very large number of potential interactions here. So if we don't start standardizing soon, I think we're in trouble. That's my personal belief, and I think the CIM can help get past that. All right, so as everyone knows, the future power system looks radically different from today. We have intermittent renewable resources. We have local power production from the distribution system. And the thing I'm most interested in these days, we have a need for more grid services to basically cover the variation that we're seeing from the previous two. So we're going to need more voltage support, more frequency support, more energy for standby, all these sorts of things. So we've really been thinking about this, and the CIM has a number of more recent updates to it that weren't there a few years ago. The CIM can now support low voltage or unbalanced networks. You can do steady state and dynamic analyses with inverter-based resources in your model. And we now have extensions to track all the smart inverter settings. And CIM has a native interface now to 61850. So while the US doesn't use 61850 for this, they've been more interested in IEEE 2030.5 maybe for this, but there is a native interface to 61850 already for 1547 settings. So that can get you a long way to discovering capabilities and potentially changing capabilities of devices. On the enterprise package side, we now have extensions to track what we call data sheets. So if you think about a DER registry, there are ways to track standard characteristics for standard products. So every inverter on the market, every potentially every EV charger, these sorts of things could have their own data sheet. So if you have data sheets tracked in a standard way in the model, then the utility folks who are doing analyses can bring those into their analysis package and look at different scenarios, looking at EV growth on a feeder or solar production, and see what sort of edge cases might be challenging in the future. The interesting thing around DERs is a lot of people think about them from the installation perspective, and then they basically ignore it. But as everyone knows, things break over time. Solar systems have a 25-year lifespan, and even solar that's been installed even in the time when wholesale markets began may be now sort of at their end of life. What utilities I don't think have been doing is tracking the asset health. When do these solar systems expire, or how are they degrading? When you have an EV, maybe you sell it, it no longer is at that site. So if you start to track your DERs as a utility, if you don't also track when they disappear, you end up with an overcounting of DERs, with a lot of ghost DERs that are in your model, in your data set, but not actually there in reality. So we can extend the asset management package. We already have the sort of messages to do asset health and status and all those sorts of things that we do internally at utilities to track the health of transformers and things like that. And it's not that hard to then apply it to the assets that are in the field that are not owned by the utility. And then finally, the markets package has the implementation of virtual power plants. So the grid package and the enterprise package are much more focused on the things you can go and touch, the real things, but the market package allows you to do virtual resources. So you might not want to model every thermostat on your grid, but you might model that flexible demand resource as a virtual aggregation without the underlying detail. So that's why I often call the markets package the virtualization package, because you can model things without the physical things below it. So there is now a fourth set of IEC standards. It's the 62746, and this is the customer interface to the grid. So this is where all of the new messages are being created that are focused on communicating with the grid edge. The first release was in November of 2024. There are 5 messages in the 62746-4 profile. one that defines a virtual resource or a physical resource, basically a DER characteristic. What's its size? What's its location? What's its ability to provide grid services? Basically nameplate kind of information there. There's an offer/scheduling message. There's a clearing/dispatch message. There's a way to send back and forth time series data. So this is useful for things like baselines if it's a DER kind of DR kind of resource. And there is a pricing service. So if you are implementing a price responsive program where you're publishing prices, whether that's a wholesale market LMP or whether that's a distribution LMP inspired kind of price, there is a standard price publication formula which tells you where on the grid that price is valid and what services are included. So you might have a congestion price service, and batteries on a grid could subscribe to that price, and when the value of congestion support rises to a certain level, the battery could jump into action. So that is kind of different than the previous four, in that the previous four are much more traditional command and control sort of utility direct business devices, and the last one is for these newer, more invisible, decoupled or semi-invisible devices on the grid. So talk a little bit about industry cost here. The CIM was originally developed, as I mentioned, in the 80s to basically replace these mimic panels, these old scale buttons on physical boards, and move towards EMSs. And the savings for a single for the number of large utilities that might need this would be in the millions of dollars. That's in the 2000 to support wholesale markets. So now you've got more market participants. You've got more generators and demand response aggregators coming in. So now we're in the many millions. But if you think about now, thinking about this into the final stage where we have literally millions of devices that may be communicating, there is the bottom up. You can think about billions of dollars of potential savings if we can standardize some of this. All right, so where we get those numbers from here is looking at utility interfaces, and we've done a little bit of bottom up estimating on what that might look like. So here's the ISO RTO to utility interfaces. So when an ISO has an interface, every utility has to build some adapters to it, and we've done some upfront plus maintenance costs estimates on that piece. And now we also have aggregators, and there's more of those, perhaps a simpler interface for them. But now if you think about all of those same aggregators going to all those other utilities, now you have this explosion of many-to-many interfaces. Again, we have 3,000 utilities, not just 7. So with FERC 222, they'd all be communicating not only with at least one utility, but also one. So there's also some costs that we put at the bottom here for building internal systems at the ISO and RTO. So that's where we come up with the billions. We think that's a reasonable sort of savings if we were to be able to minimize some of these integration costs. So that's the end of my presentation. We have about 10 minutes if people have questions. Didn't get any during the talk, so let me pause here.
Yeah, and I'll add in, Scott, the way this meeting, you all are muted at the moment, but if you use the raise hand feature or put your question in the Q&A chat, then I can unmute you if you have any questions to ask.
Larissa?
Got to take that mic well. Yeah, gee, it does seem like the trends, the really proliferation of the DER great market penetration, a lot of areas, particularly with the come on, the EVs. It seems like it should be sooner than later, but it seems like a lot is not moving. I mean, even with respect to the standard 1547, as someone in these regulatory proceedings, I feel the adoption is going very slowly. What do you see as the most significant barriers to achieving sooner than later in terms of the adoption here and more coming up to speed with the Europe?
Yeah, great question. Thank you for that. And it's one I was, I guess, hoping someone would ask. The challenge is not a technical one. We have plenty of experience and actually some implementation experience doing this in Europe because we're using a lot of the same concepts. It's really the things we're doing today is outreach and awareness. A lot of people just don't know that this tool is out there and that they can use it. Like I said, the model is open source. If regulators can see that there are these tools that are out there and can encourage the utilities in their footprints to go and use them, then that's good. EPRI's doing a good job in marketing some CIM activities, some model sharing activities. The labs have some projects trying to gain exposure to this. So on the academic side or the semi-academic side, everyone is pretty well bought into this is a good approach. It's really just getting, and that's why I put those barriers in there, those three, unicorn and turtle and dollar sign, because those are you get a lot of pushback, and sometimes the utilities I think need a little bit of a push, a little bit of an incentive to go and look into this.
I think also you need the kind of organizations that are more directly, that like EPRI, the labs, they still don't interact directly with the regulatory venues and have that kind of connection like NARUC. SEPA actually has been doing a lot to help explain to its utility members this. I myself never knew about this at all until I first heard it through SEPA, because I'm not active like in the IEEE, for example. I'm not an engineer, but I think you need kind of organizations that are picking this up that are more in direct and frequent interaction with the regulatory venues to be able to bring in the regulators to help advance this, in my opinion.
Yeah, and one of the nice things is that because so many of the big vendors like Siemens, GE, Schneider, Hitachi, they're all global companies, and they're doing this stuff in Europe. So in some ways they would be happy to, and we have a lot of those participants. So it's not even vendor pushback. It's a lot of it is pushback from utilities that they're not aware of it. So thanks for that. Yeah, let's figure out, if you have ideas, please share them. This kind of presentation, maybe there's a slightly different marketing angle we need, but let us know.
GWAC too has been very trying to more directly interact with regulators on this. That's another too, GWAC.
Yeah, GWAC hasn't been as CIM supportive in the past, at least, but hopefully they'll come around.
It does have some good members on this.
Yeah.
All
right, we have a couple other questions out there.
Yeah, Thomas, I unmuted you, so you'll have to unmute yourself now, but you should be good to go.
Thomas? All right, maybe Thomas has got a mic issue. Was there another hand that was up? Or there might have been a question in the chat. Let's see.
Yeah, it was a question in the chat. It was
if
we're
you've
going to
got
be
that.
sharing the presentation.
Okay,
and
great.
yes, for everyone who hasn't seen that comment, we will be posting the recording on FERC2222.org in the library section. Scroll to the bottom of that page And I posted the link as well in the meeting chat.
I guess I shouldn't have cut you off, Larissa. We could have talked more since Thomas doesn't seem to have his mic.
Well, Ken Wax, that's all I want to say, but others, I'm sorry. You got my question.
Yep, thank you. All right. I assume no one else has questions.
I'll say one more thing if I might.
Yeah, please.
See, I'm working within CIM on transactive energy, and this is an area that I do have to tell you I have struggled with. I've had to just let this wash over, but it does begin to register. And to me, this side, in terms of supporting like the evolution of transactive energy markets, is just essential. So, I'm a good litmus test. You got to stay with it. It takes time for people like me, but I see how essential it is.
Yeah, transactive energy is another topic we can get into some other time. It's not really a CIM kind of thing because it's much more peer-to-peer on that one, but
No,
definitely
I don't address this as peer-to-peer at all. This is for distribution, operational
perfect. Yeah,
markets, and this is
where I'm going
to underpin the enabling, the exchange of information, the communications structuring and all. So no, and this is why, fortunately there are some good members in GWAC that do go for CIM, and also the NIST group. They're very much trying to advance this.
Yeah, I was back in the Obama days when we had, I forget what the things were called back in the 2000s. We had the NIST smart grid activity, so that was definitely some cross-pollination there. There was a question around utility examples. So yeah, I can give you tons of examples. In US, it's a bit less clear. On the ISO RTO side, ERCOT implemented the grid package, and that's how they share models within ERCOT from the individual transmission operators or owners to ERCOT. California ISO uses some of the market package in its internal systems. None of the ISOs, unfortunately, use the external market interfaces, which I would really like to see because you could standardize price feeds and bid offers and stuff so that you wouldn't have different interfaces at every ISO RTO. At the transmission level, a number of transmission utilities have implemented CIM internally. And at the distribution level, it's starting. I will say EPRI has a number of initiatives and some sort of informal communities that are starting, of utilities that are starting on this path and sharing sort of success stories internally. So if you're interested in learning more about that for a particular utility, send me an email afterwards, and I can connect you up with the EPRI folks, and maybe you can find some partners there. Okay.
And I'll put the first slide up so everyone has Scott's information. There you go.
So I see there's a question on the NIST CTS, which I'm not familiar with, but yeah, please, anyone who thinks there is a gap or a place where CIM could be useful, and who to contact to help fill that gap, let me know.
Did you provide your email address? I'm not sure.
Yeah, it's right. Emily's got that right on the slide, the top slide there. It's on the bottom left.
I can also type it out in this chat if that's helpful.
Yeah, I can do that too.
For some reason, I don't know, I'm blind. I can't see it. Yeah.
That's all right. I'll just put
on
it in
this
the chat.
slide. You saying it's on this slide that's up?
I just dropped it in the chat.
Oh, perfect. Thanks, Scott.
Oh, okay.
Looks like some people are typing, so maybe there's a couple more questions. We are at the top of the hour.
Here we go.
All right. Well, I don't know if you if there's a closeout you want to make, Emily, or not, or I'll hand it back over.
Well, it looks like there's one more question. Do you want to answer that, or you have?
Oh, I didn't see it.
if you look in the chat, does the difference in system design between NA and Europe have a impact on the difference in the rate of adoption?
Great
Obviously, North
question.
America.
In great question. So there's sort of three domains. Transmission, you can use it straight away. There's really no change. The market designs are different. So we do have different market sort of sub packages because the market design is very different. The distribution topology is, if you're familiar with Europe, it's three-phase balance. So there's three phases to every home as opposed to a single and reflected phase that goes down each house here. So we did have to do a lot of upgrades to the CIM to cover unbalanced modeling. We believe that is done. It just needs to be sort of implemented and get the real world experience. So there are differences between Europe, the rest of the world, and us, but we think we've got it covered. All right.
All right.
Thank
And with
thank you
that,
all.
yeah, let's go ahead and close it out. Let's thank you to Scott for presenting today on CIM. Also, we'll just do our usual call for help, which is if you're aware of something going on related to FERC Order 2222 at a state commission, we'd love to hear about it. We welcome making contacts at commissions. So please feel free to reach out to me, Suzanne Bertin, with any updates for your states, and let's get connected. All right. Thank you very much. Appreciate your time today.